The dust from the stagecoach had barely settled when Kade Remington heard the sound of a woman crying somewhere beyond the livery stable, her sobs carrying through the hot California afternoon air like a wounded bird's call. He had just arrived in Sierra City that morning, in the summer of 1878, his saddlebags heavy with what little savings he had managed to scrape together from 5 years of driving cattle up the Chisholm Trail. The town sat nestled in the Sierra Nevada foothills, a place where gold fever had cooled, but opportunity still beckoned for those willing to work hard. Something about those desperate sobs pulled at him, making him abandon his plans to secure lodging and instead follow the sound around the weathered wooden building. What he found made him stop in his tracks. A young woman sat on an overturned crate behind the stable, her dark hair falling loose from its pins, her shoulders shaking with the force of her grief. Papers were scattered around her feet, some crumpled, others fluttering in the warm breeze that carried the scent of pine and sage down from the mountains. Her dress was simple but well made, the deep green fabric dusty at the hem. She did not notice him at first, too consumed by whatever tragedy those papers represented. Kade cleared his throat gently, not wanting to startle her. "Miss, are you all right?" She looked up sharply, her face streaked with tears, her eyes red and swollen. For a moment, she just stared at him, and he found himself looking into the most striking eyes he had ever seen. Dark as strong coffee, and filled with such anguish it made his chest tighten. She was perhaps 22 or 23, he guessed, close to his own 26 years. Even in her distress, there was something beautiful about her, something that spoke of strength beneath the sorrow. "I am sorry," she said, her voice hoarse from crying. She wiped at her face with the back of her hand, trying to compose herself. "I did not mean to disturb anyone. I just needed somewhere quiet to think." "You are not disturbing anyone," Kade assured her, moving a bit closer but keeping a respectful distance. "But you seem mighty upset. Is there anything I can do to help?" She let out a bitter laugh that held no humor. "Unless you can fight corrupt lawyers and forge documents, I doubt there is anything anyone can do." She gestured at the papers scattered around her. "My father built an empire in this valley, the Preston Ranch, 10,000 acres of the finest grazing land and timber you ever saw. He died 3 months ago, and I thought everything would pass to me as his only child. But his business partner, a snake named Marcus Holloway, has produced papers that claim my father sold him majority ownership 2 years ago. Papers I know my father never signed because he told me just before he died that the ranch would be mine, all mine, and that I should never let anyone take it from me." Kade crouched down and picked up one of the papers, squinting at the legal language that seemed designed to confuse rather than clarify. "Your name is Preston, then?" "Victoria Preston," she said, and he noticed how she lifted her chin when she said it, pride mixing with the pain. "Everyone calls me Victoria. My father was William Preston. He came here in 61, before the war, with nothing but a dream and the will to make it real. He started with 200 acres and built it into something magnificent. And now Marcus Holloway is going to steal it all because he has lawyers and I have nothing but the truth." "The truth counts for something," Kade said, though even as he spoke the words he knew how hollow they sounded. He had seen too much of the world to believe that truth always triumphed over power and money. "Not in Judge Harrison's courtroom, it does not," Victoria said bitterly. "Harrison owes gambling debts to Holloway's brother. Everyone knows it, but nobody will say it out loud. I went to 3 lawyers in town. 2 refused to take my case outright. The third wanted $5,000 up front, money I do not have because Holloway has frozen all the ranch accounts pending the settlement of ownership." Kade studied her face, saw the exhaustion there, the kind that came not from physical labor, but from carrying an impossible weight. Something in him shifted, a feeling he could not quite name but recognized as important. He had drifted for 5 years since his own father died, working jobs that paid but meant nothing, saving money without knowing what he was saving it for. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was the reason he had felt drawn to Sierra City in the first place. "My name is Kade Remington," he said, extending his hand, "and I will help you fight this." She stared at him as if he had spoken in a foreign language. "What? You do not even know me. Why would you involve yourself in this mess?" "Because it is the right thing to do," Kade said simply, "and because I know what it feels like to lose something that should have been yours by right. My father was cheated out of his land in Texas by a banker who changed the terms of a loan after my father's signature was already on the paper. By the time we realized what had happened, it was too late. He died broken-hearted, and I swore I would never stand by and watch something like that happen again if I had any power to stop it. Victoria's eyes searched his face, looking for something. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she slowly reached out and took his hand. Her grip was firm, despite the tears still drying on her cheeks. "I do not have money to pay you." "I am not asking for money," Kade said. "I am asking for a chance to do something that matters. Now, tell me everything about these papers and about Marcus Holloway. If we are going to fight this, I need to know exactly what we are up against." Over the next hour, sitting behind that livery stable, while the sun moved slowly across the sky, Victoria told him everything. Her father had taken on Marcus Holloway as a partner 8 years earlier when Holloway arrived in Sierra City, with cash to invest and grand plans for expansion. The partnership had been successful at first. Holloway handled the business side, while William Preston managed the land and the cattle. But over the years, Victoria had noticed her father growing increasingly uneasy around his partner. There had been arguments, always behind closed doors, about directions the ranch should take, and deals Holloway wanted to make that William refused to consider. "Father never trusted him fully," Victoria explained, gathering the scattered papers into a neat pile as she spoke. "He told me once that Holloway was the kind of man who would sell his own mother if the price was right. But the partnership agreement they had signed was ironclad, or so Father thought. He talked about buying Holloway out, but every time he tried to negotiate, Holloway would demand an outrageous sum." "And then your father died," Kade said softly. "A riding accident. His horse threw him in a ravine on the north section of the property. He lived for 3 days after they found him, long enough to make me promise I would keep the ranch, that I would not let anyone push me off our land." Her voice broke slightly. "I held his hand when he died, and I swore to him I would honor that promise. But I do not know how to fight men like Holloway. I know how to run a ranch, how to manage accounts and handle the hands, but I do not know how to battle lawyers and forge documents." "Then it is good you found someone who is too stubborn to know when he is beaten," Kade said with a slight smile. "These papers, do you have copies of the original partnership agreement? Everything is locked in Father's office at the ranch house. Holloway changed the locks 3 days ago. He claimed it was to protect the assets until ownership was determined. But really, he was keeping me away from anything that might help my case. I have been staying at the boarding house in town, living off what little money I had saved personally. Mrs. Chen, who runs it, has been kind enough to let me owe her for meals." Kade stood, his mind already working through possibilities. "We need to get into that office, and we need to find someone who knew your father well enough to testify about his intentions and his signature, someone Holloway cannot bribe or intimidate." "There is Samuel, the foreman," Victoria said, rising as well. "He has been with the ranch for 12 years. He is loyal to my father's memory, and he hates Holloway. But he is just a ranch hand. Will his word count for anything against Holloway's lawyers?" "It will if we can find other evidence to support it," Kade said. He offered her his arm, a gesture that felt strangely natural, despite having known her for less than 2 hours. "Come on, let us go meet this Samuel and start building our case. When is the hearing?" 10 days, Victoria said, taking his arm. He felt the slight tremor in her hand, exhaustion and stress taking their toll. Judge Harrison scheduled it for 10 days from now. Holloway's lawyers asked for it to be sooner, but even Harrison could not quite manage that without making his bias too obvious. They walked together through the dusty streets of Sierra City, past the general store and the saloon, past the church with its whitewashed walls and the schoolhouse where children's voices drifted through open windows. Kade noticed how people looked at Victoria, some with sympathy, others with the studied indifference of those who did not want to get involved in rich folks' troubles. A few tipped their hats, offering quiet greetings that she returned with as much grace as she could muster. The Preston Ranch lay 5 miles outside of town, accessed by a well-maintained road that wound through golden grasslands and stands of oak and pine. They borrowed a wagon from the livery, with Kade promising payment once he settled in, and made the journey as the afternoon sun beat down on them. Victoria sat beside him on the bench seat, no longer crying, but still carrying that weight of grief and worry that showed in the set of her shoulders. "Tell me about your father," Kade said as they drove. "What was he like?" A small smile touched Victoria's lips, the first real one he had seen. He was the strongest man I ever knew, not just in body, but in spirit. My mother died when I was 8, and he raised me himself, never remarrying, though half the widows in the county would have jumped at the chance. He taught me to ride, to shoot, to read a contract, and spot a liar. He used to say that the land would outlast all of us, so we had a responsibility to care for it properly, to leave it better than we found it. He sounds like a good man. The best, Victoria said softly. He never treated me like I was less capable because I was a woman. He trained me to run the ranch as if it were already mine. Every decision, every investment, he would explain his thinking and ask for my input. These last few years, I was essentially managing the operations while he handled the broader strategy. Everyone who worked for us knew I spoke with Father's authority. That is why Holloway's claim is so absurd. If Father had really sold him majority ownership, he would have told me. He would never have kept something that significant a secret. The ranch house came into view as they crested a hill, and Kade could not help but whistle low. It was an impressive structure, 2 stories of solid timber and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides and windows that gleamed in the sunlight. Outbuildings dotted the landscape, barns and bunkhouses and corrals, all well-maintained and prosperous-looking. This was not some hard-scrabble operation barely making ends meet. This was a genuine success, the kind of place men like Marcus Holloway would kill to possess. Several ranch hands were working in the near pasture, and one of them looked up as the wagon approached. He was a weathered man of about 50 with gray threading through his dark hair, and the kind of lean, tough build that came from decades of hard work. His face brightened when he saw Victoria, and he immediately started toward them. "Miss Victoria," he called, pulling off his hat as he approached. "Thank the Lord. We have been worried sick about you." "I am fine, Samuel," Victoria said, though the catch in her voice suggested otherwise. "This is Kade Remington. He is going to help me fight Holloway's claim on the ranch." Samuel's eyes, sharp and assessing, studied Kade for a long moment. "No offense, son, but what can one cowboy do against Holloway's money and lawyers?" "More than you might think," Kade said, meeting the older man's gaze steadily. "But I will need your help, and the help of anyone else on this ranch who is willing to testify to the truth about William Preston and his intentions for his daughter." Something shifted in Samuel's expression, respect mixing with cautious hope. Everyone who works here would speak for Miss Victoria if given the chance. Mr. Preston was a fair boss and a good man. Holloway is neither. He has been strutting around here like he already owns the place, talking about changes he is going to make, people he is going to replace. Half the hands are ready to quit if he takes over. "Then let us make sure that does not happen," Kade said. "I need to see the office where Preston kept his documents. Can you get us in there?" Samuel glanced toward the house, his jaw tightening. "Holloway posted 2 of his men there, supposed to be guarding the place, but they spend most of their time drinking and playing cards in the kitchen. If we are clever about it, we might be able to slip in through the side door." What followed was a careful exercise in timing and distraction. Samuel sent one of the younger hands to create a commotion, with a supposedly spooked horse on the far side of the house, drawing Holloway's guards away from their post. While they were occupied, Kade and Victoria slipped in through a side entrance with Samuel standing watch. The office was exactly as Victoria had described it, a comfortable room lined with bookshelves and filing cabinets, with a massive oak desk dominating the center. Everything was neat and organized, the mark of a man who valued order. Victoria went straight to one of the filing cabinets and tried the drawer. Locked. "Step back," Kade said quietly. He pulled a thin strip of metal from his pocket, a tool he had learned to use during his years on the trail when locked tack rooms sometimes stood between his horses and needed supplies. It took him less than a minute to work the simple lock open. Victoria's eyes widened. "Where did you learn that?" "I have picked up a few skills over the years," Kade said with a slight grin. "Not all of them strictly legal, but all of them occasionally useful." The drawer was full of folders, each neatly labeled in a precise hand. Victoria pulled out the one marked Partnership Agreement and spread it on the desk. Kade leaned over her shoulder, close enough to smell the faint scent of lavender in her hair, and studied the document. It was dated 1870 and clearly outlined a 50-50 partnership between William Preston and Marcus Holloway, with specific clauses about decision-making and profit-sharing. Most importantly, there was a section that stated any changes to the ownership structure had to be approved by both partners in writing and witnessed by a notary. This is good, Kade said. Holloway's forged sale document would have required your father's signature and a notary's seal. If we can prove the signature was forged or the notary was bribed, we can challenge the entire thing. But how do we prove that? Victoria asked, frustration creeping into her voice. I know my father's signature, and the one on Holloway's document looks close enough that a judge might believe it is real. Kade continued looking through the files, pulling out correspondence and contracts, building a picture of William Preston's business practices. The man had been meticulous, keeping copies of everything, making notes in the margins about meetings and agreements. And then Kade found something interesting, a letter dated 6 months before Preston's death, addressed to a lawyer in Sacramento. Victoria, look at this, he said, holding up the letter. She moved closer, her arm brushing against his, and he felt that strange awareness again, that sense that something significant was happening beyond just this fight for her inheritance. The letter outlined William Preston's intention to dissolve the partnership with Marcus Holloway, citing irreconcilable differences regarding business ethics and future direction. Preston had asked the lawyer to review the partnership agreement and advise on the cleanest way to execute a separation. The lawyer's response, clipped to the back of Preston's letter, had suggested buying out Holloway's share and recommended a fair market value for the 49% stake Holloway would need to relinquish. Wait, Victoria said, pointing to a sentence in the lawyer's response. 49%. He wrote 49%, not 50%. Kade read it again, then went back to the partnership agreement. The original agreement says 50-50. Why would the lawyer refer to Holloway having 49%? They searched through more files and found the answer in a folder marked Stock Transactions. 2 years into the partnership, William Preston had purchased an additional 1% stake from Holloway for a nominal sum, a transaction Holloway had agreed to in exchange for Preston funding a personal investment opportunity that had apparently fallen through. The documentation was clear and properly notarized. William Preston had owned 51% of the ranch, making him the majority partner, which meant that even if Holloway's sale document was genuine, which it almost certainly was not, Preston would have been selling shares he owned to himself, an obvious legal impossibility. This is it, Kade said, excitement building in his chest. This proves that your father was the majority owner. Even if a judge believed Holloway's sale document, the math does not work. Preston could not have sold him 51% of the ranch because Holloway never owned that much to begin with. Victoria's hand flew to her mouth, tears springing fresh to her eyes, but these were different from the desperate sobs he had witnessed behind the livery. These were tears of hope. Are you certain this will hold up in court? It should, Kade said, especially if we can get that Sacramento lawyer to testify about your father's intentions. A letter from 6 months ago stating Preston wanted out of the partnership contradicts any claim that he would have then sold Holloway majority ownership. It establishes a pattern of your father wanting less involvement with Holloway, not more. They spent another hour carefully going through the office, taking notes, and making copies of key documents. Samuel kept watch, twice warning them when Holloway's guards started to drift back toward the house. By the time they slipped back out the side door, the sun was lowering toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange. We need to get these documents somewhere safe, Kade said as they climbed back into the wagon. Somewhere Holloway cannot reach them if he figures out what we found. There is a bank in town, Victoria said. Mr. Patterson, the manager, was a friend of my father's. He might be willing to keep them in his vault. They made the trip back to Sierra City quickly, both of them energized by what they had discovered. At the bank, a solid brick building that stood as one of the more substantial structures in town, they found Mr. Patterson just preparing to close for the day. He was a portly man with kind eyes and mutton chop whiskers that had gone completely gray. Victoria, he said warmly, then his expression turned somber. I heard about the hearing. I am so sorry, my dear. Your father was one of the finest men I ever knew. Mr. Patterson, I need to ask you for a favor, Victoria said. We have found documents that could help my case against Marcus Holloway, but I need somewhere secure to keep them, somewhere he cannot get to them. Patterson's eyes hardened at Holloway's name. That man tried to open an account here last year, and I refused him. Anyone who cheats at cards as blatantly as he does cannot be trusted with honest people's money. Of course, I will keep your documents safe. Bring them to my office. In the privacy of Patterson's office, they showed him what they had found. His expression grew more and more pleased as he reviewed the papers. "This is excellent evidence," he said. "The stock transaction alone should be enough to throw serious doubt on Holloway's claim. And this letter to the Sacramento lawyer establishes clear intent. Have you contacted him yet?" "We just found the letter this afternoon," Kade explained. "I was thinking of sending a telegram tonight." "Better yet," Patterson said. "Take the train to Sacramento and speak with him in person. A telegram can be ignored or delayed. A man standing in his office demanding answers cannot be. The rail runs through here twice daily. There is an evening train that leaves in 2 hours. You could be in Sacramento by midnight, meet with the lawyer first thing tomorrow morning, and be back here by tomorrow evening." Kade looked at Victoria, seeing the exhaustion in her face. She had been through so much already today, and now he was going to ask her to embark on an overnight journey. But she met his eyes and nodded. "We should go. Every piece of evidence we can gather strengthens our position." "Then it is settled," Patterson said. "I will keep these originals locked in my personal vault. Victoria, write out a letter of authorization for Mr. Remington to act on your behalf in matters relating to your father's estate. That will give him legal standing to request information and testimony from the Sacramento lawyer." While Victoria wrote the letter, her hand surprisingly steady. Despite everything, Patterson pulled Kade aside. "Son, I do not know what your stake is in this fight, but I am glad Victoria has found someone willing to stand with her. Marcus Holloway has powerful friends, and he plays dirty. Watch your back." "I will," Kade promised. "But I am not afraid of men like Holloway. I have dealt with worse." They made the evening train with minutes to spare, boarding with just the clothes on their backs and the documents Patterson had insisted they take as copies. The car was half empty, populated by miners heading north and businessmen in the dusty suits. Kade and Victoria found seats near the back, away from the other passengers. As the train pulled out of the station, the rhythmic clacking of wheels on rails filling the air, Victoria finally let herself relax slightly. She leaned back against the seat, closing her eyes. "I still cannot quite believe this is happening. This morning I thought I had lost everything. Now there might actually be hope." "There is more than hope," Kade said. "We have real evidence, we have witnesses, and we have 10 days to build a case that Judge Harrison cannot ignore, no matter how much he owes Holloway's brother." She opened her eyes and looked at him, really looked at him, as if seeing him for the first time. "Why are you doing this truly? You said it was about your father, but this is more than that. You are risking yourself for someone you just met. That is not normal." Kade was quiet for a moment, trying to find the right words. "When my father died, I drifted. I worked, I saved money, but I did not have a purpose beyond surviving to the next day. I kept waiting for something to happen that would make me feel like I was living instead of just existing. And then I heard you crying behind that stable, and something in me just knew, this is what I'm supposed to be doing, helping you fight this battle that matters. It means something." Victoria's eyes glistened, but she did not look away. "You are a very unusual man, Kade Remington." "I will take that as a compliment," he said with a smile. They talked through the night as the train carried them north through the darkness. Victoria told him more about her life, about growing up on the ranch, about the mother she barely remembered, and the father who had been her whole world. Kade shared his own stories, about Texas and the cattle drives, about sleeping under stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch and weathering storms that could turn a herd into a stampeding river of deadly hooves and horns. Somewhere around midnight, as the conversation lulled, Victoria's head drooped and came to rest against Kade's shoulder. He did not move, hardly dared to breathe, as she fell into an exhausted sleep. He sat there in the dim light of the railroad car's oil lamps, feeling the warm weight of her against him, and realized that what he had said earlier was not quite complete. Yes, helping her fight for her birthright mattered, but there was something else happening too, something he had not expected and could not quite name yet. Something that had to do with the way his heart had lurched when he first saw her tears, with the fierce protectiveness he felt when he thought about Holloway trying to steal what was rightfully hers, with the way it felt perfectly natural to have her sleeping against his shoulder. He was falling for her. The realization should have scared him. They had known each other for less than a day, but nothing about this felt rushed or wrong. It felt inevitable, like watching the sun rise, an event so natural and right that questioning it seemed absurd. When they pulled into Sacramento just after midnight, Kade gently woke Victoria. She sat up, disoriented for a moment, then realized where she had been sleeping. Color flooded her cheeks. "I am so sorry. I did not mean to use you as a pillow." "I did not mind," Kade said softly, and the way her eyes met his suggested she understood he meant it. Sacramento at night was a different world from Sierra City, larger and more bustling despite the late hour. Gas lamps lit the streets, and saloons still rang with piano music and laughter. They found a respectable hotel near the train station, and Kade secured 2 rooms, using some of his carefully saved money to ensure they would both have proper rest before the morning's business. At his room door, Victoria paused. "Thank you, Kade, for everything. I know I keep saying it, but I do not have better words." "You do not need to thank me," he said. "Just get some sleep. Tomorrow we get another piece of the puzzle." In his own room, lying in an actual bed for the first time in weeks, Kade found his mind too active for sleep. He kept thinking about Victoria, about the ranch, about the fight ahead. But he also thought about what might come after. If they won, and he was increasingly confident they would, what then? Would she want him to stay and help run the ranch? Would there be a place for him in her life beyond this crisis? Or would he drift again, back to whatever waiting existence he had lived before? He forced the questions away. First they had to win. Everything else could be sorted out after. Morning came bright and clear, with the smell of the Sacramento River drifting through the open window. Kade met Victoria in the hotel dining room for breakfast, and they planned their approach over coffee and eggs. The lawyer's office opened at 8 o'clock. They would be his first visitors of the day. Martin Fletcher, attorney at law, operated out of a tidy office on a tree-lined street near the state capitol building. He was a thin man of about 40, with sharp, intelligent eyes and the kind of precise movements that suggested a disciplined mind. When his clerk showed Kade and Victoria into his office, Fletcher looked up from his desk with mild curiosity that turned to surprise when Victoria introduced herself. "Miss Preston," he said, standing quickly, "I was so sorry to hear about your father's passing. He was an exceptional man. I only wish I had been able to help him with the partnership dissolution before." He trailed off delicately. "That is actually why we are here," Victoria said, and launched into an explanation of Holloway's claim and the hearing scheduled for the following week. She showed him the copies of the documents they had found, including his own letter to her father. Fletcher's face grew darker as he studied the papers. "This is outrageous. Your father contacted me specifically because he wanted out of his association with Holloway. He told me he suspected Holloway of several ethically questionable activities and did not want the Preston name associated with them any longer. The idea that he would then have sold Holloway majority ownership is absurd on its face." "Would you be willing to testify to that in court?" Kade asked. "To state clearly what William Preston's intentions were regarding the partnership?" "Absolutely," Fletcher said without hesitation. "In fact, I have notes from our meetings that might be useful. Your father was very specific about his concerns. He mentioned that Holloway was involved in a land scheme targeting immigrant farmers, selling them worthless property with bad titles. William felt that even though the scheme was not directly connected to the ranch, his association with Holloway made him complicit. That was the final straw that led him to seek dissolution." They spent 2 hours in Fletcher's office, going over every detail, building a timeline of William Preston's growing desire to separate himself from Marcus Holloway. Fletcher provided copies of all his correspondence with Preston, including notes from meetings that painted a picture of a man deeply troubled by his partner's ethics. It was powerful evidence that directly contradicted Holloway's narrative. "There is one more thing," Fletcher said as they prepared to leave. "I took the liberty of having a colleague of mine who specializes in document authentication review the signature on Holloway's alleged sale agreement. You had mentioned it in your initial letter to me, and I was curious. According to my colleague, while the signature looks superficially similar to William Preston's hand, there are several inconsistencies. The pressure points are wrong, and the flow of certain letters suggests hesitation, which is inconsistent with someone signing their own name. It is not definitive proof of forgery, but it is enough to raise serious doubts." "Would your colleague testify to that?" Kade asked. "I will ask him," Fletcher promised. "But I believe he will. Theodore hates forgery. He considers it an affront to his profession as a document examiner." They left Fletcher's office with considerably more than they had come for. On the train back to Sierra City, Victoria was almost giddy with relief. "We actually have a chance. A real chance. I thought I was going to lose everything my father built, and now we might actually win." "We are going to win," Kade said firmly. "Holloway's case is built on lies, and we are dismantling it piece by piece." She reached over and took his hand, a gesture that felt both bold and completely natural. "I could not do this without you. You know that, do not you?" "You are stronger than you think," Kade said, but he did not pull his hand away. "You would have found a way to fight, even without me." "Maybe," Victoria said, "but I am very glad I do not have to." They arrived back in Sierra City late that afternoon to find the town buzzing with news. Marcus Holloway had been making his own moves, spreading word that Victoria was squandering ranch money on a desperate legal fight she could not win. He had also, according to the gossip missus, Chen shared when they stopped by the boarding house, been meeting with several of the town's prominent citizens, presumably lining up support for his takeover of the ranch. "He is trying to paint me as an hysterical woman who cannot accept reality," Victoria said, as they walked toward the bank to update Patterson on what they had found in Sacramento. "He is using the fact that I am young and female against me, making it seem like I am not capable of understanding business matters." "Then we make sure everyone sees the evidence," Kade said. "We show them that you are not just a grieving daughter making emotional claims. You have documents, testimony, hard proof that Holloway is the one who is lying." At the bank, Patterson was delighted with the news from Sacramento. Fletcher's testimony will be crucial. He is respected throughout the state, and if his colleague can testify about the signature forgery, that could be the piece that makes even Harrison think twice about ruling in Holloway's favor. "We still need to prepare for the hearing itself," Kade said. "Victoria needs a lawyer to present the case. The third one she spoke to before, the one who wanted $5,000 up front, is he actually competent? Gerald Stevens, he is more than competent. He is one of the best litigation attorneys in the territory," Patterson said. "But he is also expensive and risk-averse. He does not take cases unless he is confident he will win and be paid." "What if we could convince him we have a winning case?" Kade suggested. "With everything we have found, surely he would see that the odds have shifted." Patterson considered this. "It is worth trying, but you will need to present a united and confident front. Stevens respects strength and preparation. If you can show him you have done the work and gathered real evidence, he might reconsider." They went to see Gerald Stevens that evening, finding him in his office above the general store, surrounded by law books and case files. He was a man in his early 50s with silver hair and the kind of careful, measured way of speaking that suggested he never said anything he did not fully mean. "Miss Preston," he said when they were shown in, "I heard you have been making inquiries around town. I trust you have had more luck finding representation than you did when we last spoke." "Actually, we have come back to you," Victoria said, and her voice was steady and sure. "We have gathered significant evidence that undermines Mr. Holloway's claim, and we need an attorney skilled enough to present it properly to the court." Stevens raised an eyebrow. "What kind of evidence?" For the next hour, Kade and Victoria laid it all out. The stock transaction showing William Preston owned 51% of the ranch. The correspondence with Martin Fletcher establishing Preston's intent to dissolve the partnership. Fletcher's willingness to testify. The document examiner's analysis of the allegedly forged signature. Samuel the foreman's testimony about the relationship between Preston and Holloway. Every piece of the puzzle they had assembled in less than 2 days. By the time they finished, Stevens was leaning forward in his chair, his eyes sharp with interest. "This is substantial, much more substantial than I would have expected. How did you find all of this so quickly?" "We were motivated," Kade said dryly. "Clearly." Stevens shuffled through the documents they had brought, reading carefully. "I will be honest with you, Miss Preston. When you first came to me, I thought you were fighting a losing battle based on emotion rather than evidence. I am forced to revise that opinion. This case is winnable. In fact, I would say you have better than even odds of prevailing." Victoria's face lit up with hope. "Does that mean you will take my case?" "It does," Stevens said. "But I still require payment. My standard fee for a case of this complexity would be $3,000. However, given the strength of the evidence and my respect for your father's memory, I will agree to take 15% of the ranch's value if we win, paid over 5 years. No upfront fee, and no payment if we lose. Do you find those terms acceptable?" Victoria looked at Kade, and he gave her a small nod. It was more than fair. "Yes," she said, "those terms are acceptable." Then we have a great deal of work to do, Stevens said, already making notes. I will need to depose the foreman, meet with Fletcher and his colleague, and prepare our argument. We have 8 days until the hearing. It will be tight, but it is enough time if we are diligent. The week that followed was a blur of activity. Kade and Victoria spent almost every waking hour working with Stevens, reviewing documents, preparing testimony, anticipating arguments Holloway's lawyers might make. Martin Fletcher and his colleague Theodore Winters arrived from Sacramento, both men prepared to testify. Samuel and 3 other ranch hands who had worked closely with William Preston gave depositions about his character and his relationship with Holloway. Through it all, Kade and Victoria grew closer. They worked side by side, often late into the night in Stevens' office, going over details until the words blurred on the page. They took meals together at the boarding house, Mrs. Chen clucking over them like a mother hen and making sure they ate properly. They walked the streets of Sierra City in the brief moments when they had time to breathe, talking about everything and nothing, learning each other's histories and hopes and fears. One evening, 3 days before the hearing, they found themselves alone in the boarding house parlor. Everyone else had retired for the night, and a single oil lamp burned on the side table. Victoria was curled in a chair, her stockinged feet tucked under her, looking more relaxed than Kade had seen her since they met. "Can I ask you something?" she said suddenly. "Anything. What will you do after the hearing? After we win, I mean. Will you stay in Sierra City, or will you drift again?" Kade had been thinking about this question himself, turning it over in his mind during the quiet moments. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether there is a reason to stay," he said carefully. Victoria set down the paper she had been reading and looked at him directly. "Would I be reason enough?" His heart kicked in his chest. "Victoria, I know we have only known each other for a week," she said quickly. "I know this is happening fast and probably seems foolish, but I feel something when I am with you, Kade, something I have never felt with anyone else. You make me feel brave and capable, and like I am not alone in the world, and I keep thinking about what it will be like when this is over, and I cannot imagine you not being there." Kade crossed the room and knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. They were small hands but strong, with calluses from years of ranch work. "You are more than reason enough. I have been trying to figure out how to tell you that I am falling in love with you, terrified that it was too soon, or that you would think I was only staying for gratitude or obligation. But it is not that. It is you. Your strength, your determination, the way you stand up for what is right even when it seems impossible. I want to stay. I want to help you run the ranch and build something lasting, if you will have me." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she was smiling. "Of course I will have you. I think I started falling in love with you the moment you said you would help me fight, when you had no reason to care but decided to, anyway." He reached up and cupped her face, wiping away the tears with his thumbs. "Then we will do this together. We will win this case, and then we will build a life worth living." She leaned down and kissed him, a soft, sweet kiss that held all the promise of their future. It lasted only a moment before they pulled apart, both of them aware that propriety still mattered, that they had to be careful about appearances, especially with the hearing so close. But that brief kiss was enough to seal something between them, a commitment that went beyond words. The day of the hearing arrived with cloudless skies and heat that shimmered off the dusty streets. The courthouse was packed, every seat in the gallery filled with townspeople curious to see how the battle between Victoria Preston and Marcus Holloway would play out. Kade sat directly behind Victoria and Stevens at the plaintiff's table, close enough to offer silent support. Marcus Holloway sat at the defendant's table with his 2 lawyers, both men with expensive suits and calculating eyes. Holloway himself was a handsome man in his 40s, with dark hair going gray at the temples, and the kind of smooth confidence that came from years of getting his own way. He looked at Victoria with something like amusement, as if her challenge to his claim was a minor inconvenience rather than a serious threat. Judge Harrison took the bench promptly at 9 o'clock. He was an older man with a florid face and watery eyes, and Kade noticed how his gaze flickered to Holloway with something that might have been nervousness. Patterson's information about gambling debts seemed entirely credible. The hearing began with Holloway's lawyers presenting their case. They introduced the sale agreement that allegedly transferred majority ownership to their client, pointing out the signature that appeared to be William Preston's and the notary seal that seemed legitimate. They painted a picture of Preston as a man who recognized his own mortality and wanted to secure his daughter's future by ensuring the ranch would be in strong hands after his death. It was a compelling narrative, skillfully presented. If that had been all the evidence, Kade could see how a judge might have ruled in Holloway's favor. But then it was Stephen's turn, and the careful preparation of the past week showed its worth. He began by introducing the stock transaction document showing Preston owned 51% of the ranch, making the alleged sale mathematically impossible. Holloway's lawyers tried to argue the transaction was invalid, but Stevens had secured testimony from the notary who had witnessed it, an elderly woman who remembered the transaction clearly and testified it was entirely proper and legal. Next came Martin Fletcher, who testified about his meetings with William Preston and Preston's clear intention to end his partnership with Holloway, not deepen it. Fletcher presented his correspondence and meeting notes, all of which painted a picture of a man who had come to distrust his partner and wanted out of the relationship. Theodore Winters followed, providing his expert analysis of the signature on Holloway's sale document. He used side-by-side comparisons and technical language to demonstrate the inconsistencies that suggested forgery. While he stopped short of declaring it definitively fake, he made it clear that serious doubts existed about its authenticity. Samuel testified about working closely with William Preston for 12 years and never once hearing the rancher express satisfaction with Holloway or intention to increase his partner's stake in the business. 3 other longtime ranch hands corroborated this testimony. Finally, Victoria herself took the stand. Stevens had coached her carefully, and she spoke with clear confidence about her father's wishes, about his explicit promise that the ranch would be hers, about her years of working alongside him and learning every aspect of the operation. Holloway's lawyers tried to rattle her during cross-examination, suggesting she was a grieving daughter who had misunderstood her father's intentions or was letting emotion cloud her judgment. But Victoria held firm, answering every question with facts and specifics that demonstrated her competence and understanding. When she mentioned her father's concerns about Holloway's involvement in fraudulent land schemes, targeting immigrant families, Holloway himself visibly tensed. His lawyers quickly objected, claiming the accusation was irrelevant and unsupported, but the damage was done. The gallery murmured, and Judge Harrison's expression shifted slightly. The hearing lasted all day, with each side presenting evidence and testimony, making arguments and counter-arguments. By the time final statements were delivered, the sun was lowering in the sky, and everyone in the courtroom was exhausted. But there was a sense in the air, a feeling that had shifted subtly as the day progressed. What had begun with the impression of a desperate young woman fighting inevitable reality had transformed into a serious legal case with substantial evidence on both sides. Judge Harrison announced he would take the matter under advisement and issue his ruling in 3 days. As the courtroom emptied, Kade caught the look on Holloway's face. The smooth confidence was gone, replaced by barely contained fury. This was not going the way he had expected. "You did beautifully," Kade told Victoria as they left the courthouse. "You were perfect up there." "I was terrified," she admitted. "But I kept thinking about Father, about his promise that the ranch would be mine, and it gave me strength." Stevens joined them outside, looking satisfied. "I believe we made our case. Harrison would have to ignore substantial evidence to rule against us, and even he will think twice about that. Too many people heard what was presented in there today. If he rules for Holloway now, it will be obvious corruption." The 3 days of waiting were agonizing. Victoria and Kade stayed close to town, not wanting to miss the announcement of the ruling. They spent the time making plans for the ranch's future, assuming they won. Victoria had ideas about expanding the timber operations and improving breeding stock. Kade suggested implementing some innovations he had seen on other ranches, ways to make the operation more efficient and profitable. But mostly they simply spent time together, walking by the river that ran near town, sitting on the porch of the boarding house in the evening, talking about everything from serious to silly. They were building a relationship beyond the crisis that had brought them together, discovering that the connection they felt was real and lasting. On the 3rd day, word came that Judge Harrison would announce his ruling at 2 o'clock. The courtroom was even more packed than it had been for the hearing, news having spread throughout the county about the case and its implications. Kade noticed several newspaper reporters in attendance, their notebooks ready. Harrison took the bench, looking tired and somewhat grim. He shuffled papers for a moment, then cleared his throat. I have reviewed all evidence and testimony presented in the matter of Preston Ranch ownership. This has been a complex case involving conflicting documents and competing narratives. However, after careful consideration, I find that the preponderance of evidence supports the position of Victoria Preston. The courtroom erupted in noise, some people cheering, others gasping in surprise. Kade felt Victoria's hand grip his, her whole body trembling. Stevens allowed himself a small smile. Harrison banged his gavel for order. The stock transaction document clearly establishes that William Preston owned 51% of the ranch at the time of his death. This makes the alleged sale agreement presented by Marcus Holloway legally impossible, as Preston could not have sold Holloway 51% of a business in which Holloway already owned 49%. Furthermore, the testimony of Martin Fletcher, combined with Preston's documented correspondence, establishes a clear pattern of Preston seeking to reduce, not increase, Holloway's involvement in ranch operations. While I cannot definitively rule that the sale agreement is forged, sufficient doubt has been raised about its authenticity to make it unreliable as the sole basis for transferring ownership. Therefore, I rule that Victoria Preston is the rightful heir to her father's majority stake in Preston Ranch, giving her controlling ownership. The existing partnership agreement between William Preston and Marcus Holloway remains in effect regarding Holloway's 49% stake, unless and until Miss Preston exercises her right as majority owner to buy out that stake or dissolve the partnership through legal means. More gavel banging followed as the courtroom erupted again. Holloway was on his feet, his face purple with rage, shouting something at his lawyers, but Harrison was already leaving the bench, and there was nothing Holloway could do. The ruling was final unless he wanted to appeal to a higher court, a process that would be expensive and, given the strength of the evidence, unlikely to succeed. Outside the courthouse, Victoria threw her arms around Kade, laughing and crying at the same time. "We won! We actually won!" "You won," Kade corrected, but he was grinning. "You fought for what was yours, and you got it." Stevens emerged a moment later, shaking hands with Martin Fletcher and Theodore Winters, who had stayed for the ruling. "Miss Preston, congratulations. Your father would be very proud of you today." "Thank you," Victoria said, wiping her eyes. "Thank you all. I could not have done this without any of you." The celebration was interrupted by Marcus Holloway storming out of the courthouse. He stopped when he saw them, his eyes blazing. "This is not over. I still own 49% of that ranch, and I will make your life hell. You may have won today, but you will regret crossing me." "Actually, Mr. Holloway, I believe you will find that is not true," Stevens said calmly. He pulled a document from his case. "I took the liberty of reviewing the original partnership agreement very carefully. There is a clause, Section 7, Paragraph 3, that allows the majority partner to dissolve the partnership for cause. Cause is defined as including any illegal or unethical business practices that might bring disrepute to the partnership. Ms. Preston has witnesses prepared to testify about your involvement in fraudulent land schemes. If you force her hand, she will invoke that clause and have you removed from the partnership entirely, with compensation for your stake calculated at book value rather than market value. A significant financial difference." Holloway's face went from purple to white. "You are bluffing." "Try me," Victoria said, her voice steady and cold. "I am offering you a choice, Mr. Holloway. You can accept a fair buyout of your stake, calculated at current market value, paid over 5 years. In exchange, you walk away quietly and we never speak of your other business dealings. Or you can fight, and I will use every legal means available to expose what you have done and force you out with nothing but the bare minimum the law requires me to pay you. Your choice." Holloway stared at her, and Kade saw the moment the older man realized he had lost. Victoria was not the naive girl he had thought he could intimidate and cheat. She was her father's daughter, with the same iron will and strategic mind. "I will want the buyout terms in writing. Stevens will have them ready for your review tomorrow," Victoria said. "Sign them, and we are done. Fight them, and I promise you will regret it." Holloway turned and walked away without another word, his lawyers hurrying after him. "That was brilliant," Martin Fletcher said admiringly. "You played that perfectly." "I learned from the best," Victoria said softly, looking up toward the sky as if she could see her father somewhere beyond the clouds. The paperwork was finalized over the following week. Holloway, faced with the prospect of public exposure and financial loss, signed the buyout agreement with minimal negotiation. Within 30 days, his stake in the ranch would begin transferring to Victoria, with payments spread over 5 years as agreed. It was a significant financial commitment, but with the ranch's profitability and Victoria's capable management, one she could easily handle. Kade stayed at the ranch, taking on the role of assistant foreman and working closely with Samuel to implement some of the improvements they had discussed. The hands, relieved to see Holloway gone and Victoria confirmed as the rightful owner, worked with renewed energy and loyalty. The ranch prospered under her leadership, just as her father had known it would. But the work, as consuming as it was, left a room for something else to grow. Kade and Victoria's relationship deepened through the summer and into fall. They rode together across the property, checking on cattle and timber operations. They made plans for the future, both for the ranch and for themselves. And when Kade asked her to marry him one evening in October, as they watched the sun set over the mountains from the ranch house porch, Victoria said yes without hesitation. They married in the spring of 1879, in the small church in Sierra City, with half the town in attendance. Mrs. Chen cried happy tears. Mr. Patterson gave Victoria away, standing in for her father with pride and affection. Samuel and the ranch hands formed an honor guard outside the church. Martin Fletcher and Theodore Winters made the trip from Sacramento to attend. Even Gerald Stevens, who rarely showed emotion, smiled during the ceremony. The years that followed were good ones. Kade and Victoria ran the ranch together, partners in every sense of the word. They expanded operations carefully, always mindful of William Preston's philosophy about stewardship of the land. The Preston Ranch became known throughout California as one of the best managed operations in the state, a place where hands were treated fairly and the land was respected. Their first child, a son they named William, after Victoria's father, was born in the winter of 1880. He had his mother's dark eyes and his father's determined chin, and from his first days it was clear he had inherited the strength of both his parents. 2 years later, a daughter followed, named Grace after Kade's mother. She was spirited and clever, always getting into mischief, but with a heart as big as the California sky. They raised their children on the ranch, teaching them the same values William Preston had instilled in Victoria: hard work, integrity, care for the land, and for the people who depended on it. Both children grew up comfortable on horseback, able to read a contract and spot a lie, prepared to carry on the legacy their grandfather had built and their parents had fought to preserve. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, Victoria would tell the story of how she and Kade met, how he had found her weeping over papers that threatened to take her birthright, how he had offered to help when he had no reason to care. The children would listen wide-eyed, as if it were a fairy tale rather than the true story of their parents' beginning. "And he just said he would help you?" William would ask, even though he had heard the story a dozen times. "Just like that?" "Just like that," Victoria would confirm, smiling at Kade across the room. "He said he would help me fight, and he did. He helped me save the ranch, and in the process, he saved me too." "I think you saved yourself," Kade would always correct. "I just happened to be there at the right time." "You were exactly where you were supposed to be," Victoria would say. "We both were." The years brought changes, as years always do. Samuel eventually retired, though he stayed on the ranch in a small cabin where he could watch the operation continue. New hands came and went, though many stayed for years, drawn by the fair wages and respectful treatment. The railroad expanded, bringing new markets for the ranch's beef and timber. Sierra City grew from a small town to a thriving community, and the Preston Ranch remained at its heart, a cornerstone of the local economy and a symbol of what could be built through hard work and integrity. Marcus Holloway left California after signing over his stake in the ranch, his reputation in tatters once word spread about his business practices. Victoria heard years later that he had died somewhere in Nevada, broke and alone, his schemes finally catching up with him. She felt no satisfaction in the news, only a kind of sad relief that he could no longer hurt anyone else. Judge Harrison resigned under a cloud of scandal 2 years after the Preston case, his gambling debts and questionable rulings finally becoming too obvious to ignore. He was replaced by a judge who actually believed in applying the law fairly, and the quality of justice in the county improved considerably. Martin Fletcher and Theodore Winters both became good friends, visiting the ranch several times over the years. Fletcher eventually took a position with the state government, working to reform property laws to protect small landholders from exactly the kind of schemes Holloway had run. Winters continued his work authenticating documents, gaining a reputation as one of the finest experts on the West Coast. Gerald Stevens continued his legal practice, and he and Victoria maintained a cordial professional relationship. He represented the ranch in various business matters over the years, always with the same careful competence he had shown during the ownership fight. Through everything, Kade and Victoria remained partners in the deepest sense. They worked together, raised their children together, built a life together. There were challenges, as there always are. Drought years when the grass turned brown and they had to make hard decisions about the herd. Market downturns that required careful financial management. The normal struggles of raising children and managing a complex operation. But they faced everything together, drawing strength from each other and from the foundation they had built. On their 20th wedding anniversary in the spring of 1899, they stood on the same porch where Kade had proposed, watching their children, now grown, working with the ranch hands in the near pasture. William was 23, already taking on more and more responsibility for the day-to-day operations. Grace, at 21, managed the ranch's finances with a skill that would have made her grandfather proud. "Do you ever think about that day behind the livery stable?" Kade asked, slipping his arm around Victoria's waist. "When I found you crying over those papers?" "Every day," Victoria said, leaning into him. "I think about how lost I felt, how hopeless everything seemed. And then you appeared and offered to help, and everything changed." "We changed it together," Kade said. "You did the hard work. You fought for what was yours. I just stood beside you." "You did more than that," Victoria said, turning to face him. "You believed in me when I was not sure I could believe in myself. You saw strength in me that I did not know I had. You gave me a partner when I thought I was alone. You gave me love when I thought my heart was too broken to accept it. You gave me this life we have built together." Kade cupped her face, seeing in her eyes the same love that had been there on their wedding day, deepened and enriched by 20 years of shared life. "You gave me a purpose, a home, a family, everything that matters." They kissed, a long, sweet kiss full of 2 decades of love and partnership. And when they pulled apart, they were both smiling. "Do you think they will be okay?" Victoria asked, nodding toward their children. "When it is their turn to run this place?" "They will be better than okay," Kade said confidently. "We raised them right. They know what matters. They will honor what your father built, what we have maintained and grown. The Preston Ranch will thrive for generations." He was right. The ranch did thrive, passed down through the generations, always managed with the same principles of integrity and stewardship that William Preston had established and Victoria and Kade had fought to preserve. The story of how it was saved, of a cowboy who found a woman weeping over papers threatening her birthright and offered to help her fight, became part of family legend, told and retold to each new generation. But beyond the ranch, beyond the success and prosperity, what really mattered was the love story at the heart of it all. 2 people who met by chance, or perhaps by fate, who recognized in each other something rare and precious, who fought together against injustice and won not just property, but a future, who built a life based on partnership and respect, and deep abiding love. On a warm evening in the summer of 1920, Victoria and Kade sat on their porch, now both in their 60s, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. William's 3 children and Grace's 2 filled the air with laughter and shouting, their joy echoing across the land that had been the foundation of everything. "Do you have any regrets?" Victoria asked, her hand in Kade's, their fingers intertwined as they had been for more than 40 years. "Not a single one," Kade said without hesitation. "Every choice I made, starting with following the sound of your crying that day, led me exactly where I was meant to be." "I love you," Victoria said, words she had spoken thousands of times, but that never lost their meaning. "I love you too," Kade replied, and kissed her forehead. "Always have, always will." They sat together as the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. 2 people who had found each other at exactly the right moment and built something that would last far beyond their own lives. The Preston Ranch stood as testament to what could be accomplished through determination and courage. But the real legacy was simpler and more profound. a love story that proved that sometimes the best things in life come from being willing to help someone fight for what is right, and from having the courage to accept that help when it is offered. Their story would be told for generations, passed down along with the land and the values that define the Preston family. And at its heart would always be that moment behind a livery stable in Sierra City, California, in the summer of 1878, when a cowboy heard a woman crying and decided to stop, to listen, and to offer help without expecting anything in return. That single act of compassion and courage had changed two lives completely, setting in motion events that would ripple through time, affecting not just Kade and Victoria, but everyone who came after them. It was a reminder that we never know which moments will define our lives, which choices will set us on paths we never imagined. For Kade, it was deciding to follow the sound of weeping instead of securing lodging for the night. For Victoria, it was accepting help from a stranger when pride might have told her to refuse. Those small decisions, made in a single afternoon, had led to everything else. The legal battle, the victory, the partnership, the love, the marriage, the children, the grandchildren, the life they had built together. As darkness fell and the stars emerged, brilliant against the black sky, Kade and Victoria remained on the porch, comfortable in the silence that comes from decades of knowing each other so well that words are not always necessary. They had lived a good life, a full life, and they had lived it together. Whatever time remained, they would face it the same way they had faced everything else, side by side, partners in every sense of the word. The ranch house glowed with lamplight, and eventually Grace came to the door, calling her parents in for the supper she had prepared. They rose slowly, their bodies not as young as they once were, but their spirits still strong, still connected by the bond that had formed that day so many years ago. Hand in hand, they walked into the house, into the warmth and light, surrounded by family and love. It was everything William Preston had hoped for his daughter when he made her promise to fight for the ranch. It was more than Victoria had dared to dream when she sat weeping behind that livery stable, certain she had lost everything. It was proof that sometimes, when all seems darkest, help appears from unexpected places, and that accepting that help with grace and courage can lead to blessings beyond measure. The story of Kade and Victoria Remington was, in the end, a simple one. Two people met, fell in love, fought together for what was right, and built a life worth living. But in that simplicity was profound truth about what matters most in life. Not wealth, though they had achieved prosperity. Not status, though they were respected throughout the state. What mattered was love, partnership, integrity, and the courage to stand up for what is right, even when the odds seem insurmountable. Their legacy lived on, not just in the land they had preserved or the business they had grown, but in the example they set for their children and grandchildren. They taught that love is not just a feeling, but a choice, made new each day. That partnership means standing beside each other through challenges and triumphs alike. That integrity cannot be compromised, no matter the cost. That sometimes the right thing to do is the hard thing, but that does not make it any less necessary. As the years passed and eventually Kade and Victoria were laid to rest, side by side on a hillside overlooking the ranch, their story continued to inspire those who came after them. The Preston Ranch remained in the family, managed with the same principles that had guided it from the beginning. And whenever challenges arose, whenever difficult decisions needed to be made, the family would remember the story of how it all began, with a cowboy who heard crying and chose to help, and a woman who had the courage to accept that help and fight for her birthright. It was a story of the Old West, of a time when the land was still being claimed and justice was sometimes hard to find. But more than that, it was a timeless story about human connection, about the power of two people choosing to face the world together, about love that grows not from convenience or comfort, but from shared struggle and mutual respect. In the end, that was the greatest legacy of Kade and Victoria Remington. Not the acres they preserved or the fortune they built, but the proof that true partnership, built on love and respect and shared values, can overcome any obstacle and create something beautiful that lasts for generations. Their love story became legend, but it remained rooted in truth, in the real lives of two real people who found each other at exactly the right moment and chose to build something meaningful together. And so, the story that began with tears behind a livery stable ended with joy and fulfillment, with a life well lived and a love that lasted beyond death. It was everything a story should be, romantic and dramatic, challenging and triumphant, but most of all, real. A testament to the power of compassion, courage, and love to transform lives and create legacies that endure.